Scott Kuykendall. I'm the Water Resources Specialist for the McHenry County Department of Planning and Development. I help oversee our scientific research into water resources, help set public policy and do planning, maintain the county's environmental compliance, and then do public education and outreach like this. We're going to be talking about working with native landscaping today. So native plants are deep-rooted, whereas the turf grass that we're standing on, only goes down, the roots only go down about an inch or two. Native plants will go down 5, 10, and even up to 15 feet. They create a network of roots and enrich the soil, so it actually acts as a sponge. And so working with native plants is going to be one of the most powerful tools that we have to address flooding and water quality issues in the county. So as over the past 40 to 50 years, our precipitation patterns have steadily increased. So we've been getting more and more rain, but we're getting that in fewer and fewer storm events. So we've been getting more rain and more intense storms. A 6-inch storm was unheard of not that long ago. Now it's a fairly regular occurrence. And our built environment is not built for that increased precipitation. You know, to be honest, most of our built environment was built to water levels and flow patterns that we had 50 years before they were built. So we're going to have to figure out ways to adapt our built environment to manage all this water. And like I said, native plants are going to be one of the most powerful tools we have in our toolbox to do that. And native plants are great, but unfortunately, because we have neglected things and introduced so many species over the past 50 years, we've got weeds that we have to contend with. If we didn't have all these weeds, it'd be very easy to reestablish native vegetation on our projects. But we have to overcome the obstacles of weeds and invasive species when we're doing these types of naturalized plantings. And you really need to have knowledgeable people doing this type of work. Native seed, they've got, our plants have different types of evolutionary adaptations for reproduction. And so some of the seeds are really heavy and drop in place. Some of the seeds are feathery and travel long distances. So you can't just grab a handful of native seed and throw it up and expect it to be evenly distributed. You really have to have people who know which seed, which species do well here, which species do well there, and how to install these, and then manage it, especially for the first 3 to 5 years. So when you're reestablishing a native prairie, it's not like flipping a light switch. It takes at least 2 years of transition for it to even start looking like a prairie. And so you need to go into it with commitment of doing it right, working with the right contractors, and having management in mind, especially for the first 3 to 5 year period. And when we're putting our contracts together to do these things, we need to have performance standards. How are you going to measure success? How are you going to hold your contractor responsible if you don't have standards that you're being held to? So it's very important for you to have your objectives defined and have performance standards that you're striving towards. And as we do this more and more, it'll become much easier and easier for all of us to be implementing these types of things in our communities. But there is a bit of a learning curve. And that's what we're here today to do, is trying to flatten that learning curve. The more we all learn about this and hear from the experts who do this type of thing, the easier it is for all of us to implement these things successfully. And that's what we really want to have, are successful projects. And by sharing this information with each other, it raises the bar, flattens that curve, and helps us implement these things successfully so that we can have better stormwater management. But it's also, you know, it's managing our precipitation, but it's also improving water quality, and it's providing wildlife habitat. So when we're landscaping with natives, we're providing a whole multitude of benefits. Whereas turf grass, it has its place, but it's really only providing one function, and that's stabilized ground and open space. If you've got I know we've got people from Public Works and school districts here today. If you've got open space and the only benefit that's being derived is that open view shed, there is no reason not to convert that from turf grass to natives. And so that's something we would really like to see more and more of. And if we have more of this, that will help us manage precipitation as we move forward. So today we're going to be looking at green infrastructure projects that the Village of Algonquin has implemented here in this area. the Village of Algonquin really has been tremendous leaders in establishing native vegetation and doing restoration projects and pursuing grants. I mean, these are no small tasks, and Algonquin really has done a stellar job of doing this, and doing it in a way that can be replicated over and over again by others. And so Michele will be talking about what the village is doing, how they do it, the standards that they have for their contractors, and also the economic benefits. Because once again, when we're talking about turf grass and their 2-inch root zones, the other thing is, we have to water it to grow, and then when it grows, we have to punish it by mowing it. And so we're out here every week mowing the turf grass. That has a very high management cost associated with it. Our native vegetation, if we go into it intent of doing it right, there will be a higher upfront cost, but the long-term cost is minimal. The Village of Algonquin has their program set up, so basically there are 2 site visits a year by qualified professionals, whereas the turf grass has to be mowed on a weekly basis. So we can have tremendous cost savings in addition to deriving all the other benefits that we talked about. And so we're also going to have Steve Zimmerman. He's the principal restoration ecologist for RES, Restoration Environmental Services.
Resource Environmental Solutions.
Brad.
And Brad.
And Brad Andreessen is project manager.
I wear many hats. Restoration manager.
Okay, restoration manager. And so they'll be talking about how to do this right. Steve and Brad have years of experience doing this type of work, and I look to them as being very high-level, qualified professionals. And so they're people that I would look to for advice if I'm looking for guidance on a project. And so I think they are some of the best speakers that we can have to talk to us about these types of projects. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Michele, and she'll get the ball rolling for us. But thank you very much for coming out. I guess the last thing is we are going to be filming this. Alicia is our communication specialist, and she's going to be filming as we go along. She's going to try and not get anybody in particular in, but is there anybody that is particularly concerned about being caught on camera participating in this event? I see no hands, but like I said, Alicia is going to try and focus on our speakers and what we're seeing as opposed to the crowds. But I thank you all for coming, and hope you all enjoy today's presentation. Did you have something, Sydney?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to make a plug that this series is co-sponsored by the McHenry County Planning and Development Department and the Environmental Defenders of McHenry County. So before you leave, make sure you grab one of the Defenders newsletters, and on page 4 is a list of the upcoming talks. So we hope you'll join us for others. Thank you.
And that's a great point. So this is part of a talking tour series that the Environmental Defenders Water and Natural Resources Committee is putting together. And once again, it's all about flattening that curve. We've got some great examples of best management practices right here in McHenry County. And by sharing these best management practices with everybody, we can all have a much better understanding of how these things work and how to do things successfully. So each of our talking tour presentations is focusing on a successful project and talking to the people who have actually worked on it and implemented it. So these are each great examples of how we can do these things in our own communities. And so take a look at the different programs that we have coming up. The next one is right back to back. I'm going to Costa Rica for 2 weeks, so it's like our window of opportunity to get this next one done. So that'll be Friday,
August 5th.
August 5th. And we're going to be visiting a series of rain gardens that were built at Woods Creek Park in Crystal Lake. So the Crystal Lake Park District has implemented 2 very creative rain gardens that manage stormwater from the parking lot and from a neighboring water park. And so it's another great example. We'll learn a lot from that event. So please join us for that one. But without further ado, Michele Zimmerman, Assistant Public Works Director for Algonquin Public Works.
Like Scott said, Michele Zimmerman. I'm the Assistant Public Works Director for the Village of Algonquin. I've been with the village for 27 years. And miraculously, we have this phenomenal green infrastructure. And I can't believe how it came together, but it was nothing really special on my part. I have a master's degree in public administration. I started out in public works because I was a summer employee and I loved it. And I changed my major in school, changed everything because I wanted to be a part of the public works community. So that's how I got involved in this business. And I just was in the right place at the right time. Naturalization, green infrastructure was kind of cutting edge about 15 or 18 years ago. I have a wonderfully fantastic boss, Bob Mitchard, the Public Works Director, and you know, we were like every other community doing our infrastructure and stormwater. We were putting in hard infrastructure, gray infrastructure, basically like get water falls on the site, get it off the site and get it downstream as soon as possible. And I grew up a nature kid, so it was just my passion and my desire to see it done differently, see it done better, and see it done more environmentally. And so I approached him if we could start changing our view of that. And now we have like a phenomenal green infrastructure that handles so many of the problems that are coming that Scott talked about and that we're having now and that the typical public works department deals with. And in dealing with those different cost savings that come to the community and the taxpayers. So this right here is a corridor that's just an example of one of our green infrastructure areas. The village has about 600 to 800 acres of open space. So that's talking like parks that are mowed, open spaces, natural areas, restored and unrestored. And kind of to put that into perspective, I have a contract for about 250 acres of parks. That's parks, the village hall, the public works facility, areas you have to mow and you have to have landscaping and formal landscaping done. You're not going to avoid that in a community, necessary part of a community, necessary part of what people want. We have about 500 acres of open space, and to date we've been able to restore about 258 of those acres. So my park open space areas, landscape beds and everything is about 250 acres. We have been contracting out that service for 7 or 8 years, and my contract for 250 acres of mowing and formal landscape bed maintenance is $350,000 a year. Okay? I have the same amount of restored natural area, and my yearly maintenance cost for that is $80,000 to $100,000. So that's a huge difference and an important factor, and one reason why green infrastructure, and this is a wonderful piece to have in a community. So we're going to kind of take you on a tour. What you see here wasn't one big project that happened. Our green infrastructure didn't happen as big projects all at once in 5 years. It happened over identifying all these areas and piecemealing together the corridors through different funding sources, grants, different opportunities that we had. One of the ways that the village has done that is 80 to 90% of our green infrastructure that we have installed and put in there has not been funded by taxpayer money. It has been funded through grant money. It has been funded through what we require of developers when they come in and develop their land and fill isolated wetlands. It's come from ordinances and different stuff that we've put in place. So it's possible to make this happen without a huge funding source to begin with for the installation of the infrastructure. The second really important piece of that on doing green infrastructure is you have to have the establishment period and then the long-term maintenance. If you're not committed to the long-term maintenance or the funding of it, don't do green infrastructure because you have wasted the money. If you don't have the commitment to do it and the money to do it, don't even install it. I hate to say that, but within 3 years without maintenance and 5 years without continued maintenance, you're back to that right there, that you spent $1 million to clear. So I just encourage anybody willing to do this. It's not something you put in the ground and walk away from. It takes a little time in the beginning to establish. After that, it's very, very easy and cost effective to maintain, but you've got to be committed to it. We're going to take you on a walk down the paths and show you different features of green infrastructure pieces. Steve and Brad, as the ecologists, will kind of explain how we come to those, how we knew what to put in there when we restored it, how we knew what to do, and questions.
Do you want me to give them a quick spiel here?
And here's the thing, like, we don't have a plan about this because we've done these before, and people often have a lot of questions or they'll ask stuff, so we kind of let it go where the group wants to take it, or what they might want to hear, or what people are asking. So we're gonna like overview it, kind of give you some information, but ask, and we'll take it in that direction.
Yeah. So I'm Steve Zimmerman. I'm a restoration ecologist. I was with Applied Ecological Services before we came Resource Environmental Solutions a year or two ago. Was there for 20 years. I grew up in Woodstock. I've worked in West Dundee these past 20 years. And so you may be asking, like, where does the village, and I'm going to chime in between Michelle and myself here, like, where do you start? Where do you start putting things in? How do you identify it? And that's why we kind of brought this along. So this is the Woods Creek Watershed Plan. So a lot of you may have heard about watershed planning, and my company does that, and we wrote this plan. I want to say it was back in 2010 that we wrote a watershed plan. The reason this is important is because it basically, if you look on actually you guys got the little handout, right? The one that's got the maps on it. If you turn to the one that's got sort of the whole page covered in like a figure, that is the Woods Creek watershed. So that blue boundary is where all the water that falls on the land, essentially if it didn't absorb or get blocked by other means, would flow through eventually down this corridor. So there's a branch from the east, or from the north that comes down. This is Woods Creek, it runs north. They converge kind of near Randall Road. They go under Randall into Woods Creek Lake, which is not shown on this map, by the way. I'm just kind of showing you what the watershed is and why this is going to be important. And then it flows down to through Town Park and Algonquin and into the Fox River. But so I showed this map and it,
because where he said that goes, this is like the headwater areas of that.
yeah, so good point. So we are down here in the south part because it flows north. So we are in the headwaters of the watershed. Thank you, that was a good point. So to the map. So when we're doing ecological restoration, and as a restoration ecologist, I look back into time to see what the landscape was. So this little map at the top and the one on the back, those are, and actually the little one on the top on this page, that is the original pre-settlement land surveyor records from the 1830s, handwritten by people on horseback measuring out the township section ranges that we have these days. And at that time, basically everything was still pristine, right? It was still, everything was natural as it could have been, almost basically when the Native Americans were still here and just after that. But it sort of shows there's some cool stuff on here. You can see where it says timber, and outside of the area that says timber, it doesn't say it because it's probably clipped out, that's prairie. And then you can see where it says swamp, and it shows all these little trail systems.
Can you show where we are on that map?
Well, yeah, so we are basically sort of on this that would be the left side of the map, or the west side of it, and you can see all the little wetland spots and stuff. Now, interestingly, if you turn the map back over, there were no streams until you got all the way down to where Woods Creek Lake is in Lake in the Hills. It was all prairie, wet prairie, swamp. The farmers that then came in, so now we're going to the image on the bottom, the aerial image that has basically all gray colors, and that's because this is the 1939 aerial image. So it's the first aerial images taken of the area, and again, we're sort of on the left side of the map where you can see the darker colored soils. That is the Woods Creek corridor. It was completely farmed. So basically farmers essentially tilled under all the prairie, dug ditches ditches through it to drain it, and now that's why we have basically ditches that run through here, but that the village is restoring and re-meandering the streams and putting back in the native buffers to recreate what was here historically, if that makes sense. And one last thing, because Michelle mentioned the grants and stuff like that. So this watershed plan, Michelle, at the end of it, it's got a list of projects for each municipality in the watershed. And Michelle has used this to as good as anyone has ever used it.
Yeah. These are all the projects in the Woods Creek watershed by like naturalized detention basins, wetlands, prairie restoration. So you can see you do a watershed plan and you get a list of all these projects. And then these help you identify critical areas, where you should start, what you should do, what's most ecologically important. From my perspective, it helps because as we do more and more restoration, people ask, when are you, now they want us to come behind their house. You know, this is weeds, it's not restored, it doesn't look pretty. And I wish I had all the money in the world to do all of them as soon as possible and right now, but I don't. And this is a way to say I've got something in writing and I've got a plan that prioritizes what should be done for what reasons, and ecologically or stormwater wise or flooding wise. So it also helps with that. But it gets you a lot of projects and it gives you a guideline of how you can piece together a green infrastructure and then look to all these sources to start getting it established.
And there's one grant, there's a couple grants, but one specifically is the Illinois EPA 319 Water Quality Grant, many of you have heard of. You now can't get that grant unless you have a project identified in an approved watershed plan. So that's how Michelle is getting grants for all these stream projects, is because they're outlined as high priority in the watershed plan. So when we send an application to the EPA for a 319 grant, it goes right to the top of the pile because it's a high priority project identified in an approved, IEPA approved watershed plan.
It's helping me get other grants too, because
Yeah.
when I apply, I go, oh, here, this is in my watershed plan, and it has a big red spot by it. It's critical area.
And I think you said you've got over $1 million of grants over the last...
In the time that we've been doing green infrastructure, yeah, about $1.3 million I've been able to bring into the village in grant funding for green infrastructure. So that's just grant funding. That's not the other part of the revenue that I help bring in by implementing the Kane County stormwater ordinances, our fee and lieu that we pay for isolated wetlands, filling, for detention mitigation and all that stuff. So the ordinances that your village has in place, and since Jerry Glogowski, one of our trustees here, that's the other part that I did want to mention. It couldn't happen without the support of your board too. And that's just super, super awesomely important. But they're the ones who, when we wrote the ordinances for watersheds and conservation design and everything, the board supported those, so that when the development and everything came in, we could leverage the fees on them to put into restricted funds to get this established where it needed to be.
I don't have a whole lot more to say.
One thing I would like to clarify, and maybe just so that Mike can pick me up, stand next to me. So I just want to make sure everybody understands what green infrastructure is. Who has heard the term green infrastructure and understands it? Is there anybody that doesn't? Okay, I'll clarify that then, because when we're talking, I was talking about native plants and turf to native. Just go ahead and hold it.
Okay.
That's fine. So when we're talking about green infrastructure, we're talking about using native plants and what's often referred to as nature-based solutions as part of our infrastructure. So one of the examples I like to use is like a storm sewer. A storm sewer is a piece of concrete that is moving water from point A to point B. So its primary function is to provide conveyance from point A to point B. A bioswale is like creating a creek, a stream, in a ditch format. And so you've got a open channel as opposed to a concrete pipe. That is still providing conveyance from point A to point B, but it's also providing groundwater infiltration and recharging our groundwater aquifers, where McHenry County gets 100% of our drinking water from groundwater aquifers. it's cleaning the water as it passes through, because it's passing through the soils and the vegetation and getting cleaned as it passes through. It's providing greater amount of flood storage, so it's actually can be designed to help reduce flooding. It's providing wildlife habitat that is necessary for all of our native pollinators, and then it's also providing aesthetic beauty. So instead of just providing conveyance from point A to point B, a pipe is considered gray infrastructure. Green infrastructure is providing a whole multitude of benefits. It's difficult to sometimes quantify that, so how much value is that providing? But it's providing flood storage, it's providing all these other things that does have very tangible benefits to the community. So when we talk about green infrastructure, we're talking about using natural systems in our built environment as part of the infrastructure. And another thing that we like to point out is nature has 4.5 billion years of research and development. There's not a problem that nature hasn't figured out. So if we look to nature for solutions, we can find those multiple benefits and provide benefits to our built environment beyond what our gray infrastructure is providing. That doesn't mean that there isn't a place for gray infrastructure, just like Michelle was talking about. There are needs for our turf grass and other types of open spaces other than native areas, but it's not just turf grass and other types of open spaces. We need to integrate nature-based solutions wherever we can to try and address these other issues and derive all these benefits that can be benefited to our communities by doing that. So, that's a very general discussion of green infrastructure, but I think it provides some context as we continue our walk.
For sure.
And I want to add just one more thing. Brad, if you want to come over here. So Brad Andreessen is my coworker. He's a ecological construction manager. He manages our Huntley office just down the road. So I do like design. I design projects, but Brad is the one that puts the seed in the ground and maintains it. So know that, now you know. So talk to Brad too, as we're walking around, because he's the one that put the seed in and is managing all this stuff right now. Do we want to answer some questions? I see some hands going up, or do we?
Well, I think maybe we'll get going, and but by all means, we'll want to address questions. But I think we should get some mileage beneath our feet before we
and we're going to start over here.
So, and once again, as we go along, just try and keep evenly spaced on either side of the speakers.
I live near the Rat Creek Restoration, and I've been familiar with it. I know it's going to be great. When I walk through there, my neighbors will be standing out there going, those beautiful trees, they take all these trees, like poor animals. So maybe you could address, so what's wrong with those beautiful trees?
So actually, okay,
amongst other
Question in general.
So the question was the trees that get removed during ecological restoration projects, essentially. So actually, we got to go back, because this project, there's a dam right there. That dam is meant to be upstream from it to store water during rain events, just like all these detention basins do now. The thing is, that was done like the 70s or 80s. You can't put a dam on line with the stream anymore. So what has happened is thousands of tons of sediment have built up behind the dam, and it no longer can hold the storm water that it's supposed to store to prevent flooding downstream. And so that's the number one reason the project is being done, is because that's all got to be dug out to get the capacity back to store the stormwater.
But the trees are being removed because if you went to that same area and looked at this map, prairie, creek, no trees.
Yeah.
Everything growing in there is because it was an old farm row. It's not here for thousands of years. It is not native, and it is not beneficial to anything environmentally or whatever. It's green. You know what? It's green. It's a tree, and it's green, but it causes significantly more problems than it does benefits. And we're trying to get back to pre-settlement conditions because nature knows how to deal with it best. And that project is getting done with an IEPA grant. This village got $767,000 to ecologically restore it. And part of ecological restoration is removing
tree removal. Yeah, so it's funny.
Unfortunately, it looks like a gigantic, crazy, massive destructive disaster.
Yeah, I want to say
But it
that it's the number one question I get whenever I do a stream project, always. And it's always the hottest topic. But essentially, yeah, it's their second growth weed trees, for lack of a better term. But I get it. It's so what I'm the one that designed that, and so I have to reach a balance between, yeah, we have residents, so I tried to keep some trees, but if you keep too many trees like it was before, and if you ever walked through there, nothing was growing on the ground. It was just bare dirt. So you got to save enough trees, and I tried to save, again, there wasn't a single oak tree in there, just to tell you, like, you know, because oak trees are what you find in decent areas. I tried to save the straightest cottonwoods, elm trees, walnuts, but not so many that the sunlight couldn't get in, because it's all going to be planted with like native vegetation. And the whole stream is getting restored, by the way.
And the other part about that is we have to reestablish the floodplain. So we can't reestablish the floodplain without grading. And in order to grade, we have to remove all the invasive species. We have to grade that, form the floodplain, get the shelves up so that the water can spread out and dissipate, so it's not eroding and causing all our issues that we have with flooding and water quality. And then we have to put in like in-stream controls and water quality riffles and different things like that. So, but yeah, it's
a project that's been 5 years in the making, to be honest with you. The design, the permitting, getting the grants, and then finally going to construction.
So yeah, that's part of it, and it's a contentious question often, but
always.
Like I said, it's not flipping a switch. There is a transition period, but as you'll see, the end result is worth it.
So this is just this area here, and it's called what we call our sled hill. It's sled hill in the winter. This was how many acres was this?
That's like 15, I think.
This was just a big 15-acre piece that was identified in our watershed plan, and we took this little area and we applied for a ComEd Green Regions Open Lands Grant and got that. So we established this is the Spella Park. It's called the Spella Pollinator Project. So this is the third year.
Beginning of fourth. I think we're in the middle of the fourth. Yeah.
But just an example of, here's a grant piece, a smaller piece of land in the Green Infrastructure Network, getting this together, and then it looks sort of similar, but it has a lot of different plants than some of the creek stuff in the other areas here, because it was really geared towards pollinators. So just kind of showing you the blooming and what's happening here. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that.
I would just say, so it is still used as a sled hill, so every November Brad's crews come in, and after all the plants go dormant, and it sort of supplements a controlled burn, is we just mow it down so it can be used for sledding.
Which, that's a great thing. So we have things that are recreational that can be multi-purpose. So it's a sled hill in the winter, we mow it down, but it's this beautiful prairie in the summer. And then right down the middle, you can't see from here, but people love to like run up the hill for exercise or walk or whatever, and we mow a strip right through the middle. So you can see, people can get recreation. It serves what its purpose was in the winter, which was to be a sled hill, but in the summer we can provide this habitat, and we can also save the cost on it. Yeah, we have to mow it, right, Brad? So it gets mowed every year, so.
Yeah, there's not a lot, this area we haven't burned yet. It doesn't burn, we did, but because it was mowed down, it wasn't super quickly burned. It's also pretty early. We usually don't burn until the third year, so I think it was just in the past year that we burned it, and since it was mowed, it's kind of a little pocket.
Yeah, and one thing Michelle didn't mention is that the village, I think she has a map of like the 50 different restoration projects that she has, and it's broken into the west, central, and east sites, and they all go through a 3-year cycle. So they get burned, then the following year you just do some herbicide treatment and weed treatment, and I think there's one year it's like you just don't do anything, you just let it go, and it just they go through a cycle.
Once they're established, you can manage all your natural areas. I'm managing my 250 acres as a whole, as a whole unit in a 3-year maintenance cycle, which is what gives me that cost effectiveness and it also keeps Brad's sanity because we know what we're doing where, and he's not from this side of the town to this side of the town to all over. We're in units, and you can roll everything into those units as it gets established.
So how would you describe your 3-year maintenance strategy?
It's written into every contract that we have, and the specifications for it are written by the ecologist. So here's the planting of it is a very strict spec that he writes and Brad follows, and Brad knows anyways.
Every seed mix I put together from scratch. I never pull one from somebody's website, so I create it for the soil type.
But is it a 3-year burn cycle?
Yeah, so that's what we were just saying. So there are 3 sections of the village, and each year it's a 3-year cycle. So every 3 years, a site will get burned.
So when I do a project, the project is install it and do 3 years of maintenance to get it established. Once that is done, then I roll it into my program of my yearly maintenance. So then everything gets on that eternal cycle.
And about that, so the 3 years, it doesn't get rolled into the cycle because it takes 3 years, as Scott, you were saying, to get a prairie established. And so that 3 years gets it.
And then it
Correct.
drops into the churn after the 3 years. But every installation, every single one, is install it and maintain it for 3 years. We never, ever, ever leave out the 3-year maintenance period for the installation of a native area.
Yeah. And so every...
It has performance measures.
That's what I was just going to say. So, thank you. I was just going to say, so each prairie planting, each individual project has performance standards, which means simply you're going to have a certain percentage of native plants and a certain percentage of weeds that's okay for year 3. And so I write those standards, but we generally have a kind of a standard one for the village that essentially in a nutshell is by the end of the 3rd growing season, I think you'll have 70% native vegetation cover, and you could have as much as 10 to 20, even 30% of like non-natives and kind of just annual weeds that aren't problematic. But if you've got 70% native cover in 3 years, you've got your prairie, and it's just going to get better the next 2.
And that's the thing that we go to. Unless it's a remnant that literally hasn't been touched, we can get back to about a grade B or C with the restoration. But if the land's been disturbed, we can't really get back to A. So that's the reason for those performance standards, because it's realistic.
You can never recreate the remnant prairies that were here 200 years ago and for 14,000 years. I've walked through hundreds of them, and they're so interestingly dynamic, diverse, that we cannot create it. We just can't. So, but this is like the best example of restoration.
Can you kind of tell us what plants are?
Okay, gosh. I want to point out one thing first, because with the good, there's always bad. So do you see the strip over here of the white Queen Anne's lace? So that's a biennial. It's kind of a weed. It's not a terrible weed, but as you walk around, you'll see a strip of it. So I never give up on a prairie seeding until at least a year to a year and a half into it. You'll know by that point if the seeding failed. So it failed in a portion of this. And so we came back and reseeded it last year. And so now it's going through essentially year 2 of maintenance. So we're mowing it down a couple times this year because it just got seeded again. So yeah, things don't always work perfect.
That's why you have the performance measures in there, because they knew they weren't going to meet them, so they came back and reseeded.
We have to meet the performance standard.
We refer to that as adaptive management. So the engineers on projects will try and get as good as they can, but there's always going to be variables. So you need to be able to be prepared and have your contracts include language for adaptive management. Now, when your churn where you're having these things managed, are you putting that out for bid? Is it just one contractor?
We've been using Res for that, just because we can hire a single contractor. That is on the approval of our board. So I can say, these these are managing it. Here's the cost, village board, here's my outline. Will you approve this without a bid or whatever? We want to use them because they have been managing and installing our areas for 15 years. So getting a low bid or somebody else in here. So you can do it either way. We're doing it that way because we and the board is supporting me on getting a quality contractor that knows what we're doing. So,
I meant as opposed to doing it in-house.
No.
That's problematic with people.
They've tried. We'll just say that they tried.
We tried, but you need experts. You need experts.
That's exactly what I was
We went for about 5 years where we tried to do some in-house for cost savings, maybe to get more done, and it was not a good idea. You really need expert consultants.
Yeah, that's kind of the point. Is you really need to have people know what they're doing because you end up saving money in the long run. I wanted to point out a couple things before we move to the next spot. One thing, looking at this from a water resource perspective, is this is a slope, and if you had turf grass and compacted soils, you're going to have erosion. With the native plants, this is providing great soil stabilization. This is preventing any type of erosion. And I just love the fact that it's dual purpose. I had no idea that you use this particular area. This is, I can go home happy after seeing this alone. But I also wanted to make sure everybody understood when we talk about burning. So a prairie is fire dependent. Natural succession would go from a combination of grasses and forbs, so grasses and flowering plants, to shrubs, to trees, to forest. So without the disturbance of fire, prairie would not remain. So fire is part of managing a prairie. And if you can't get in and burn it, so like I've got 2 native gardens that on either side of the entrance of our McHenry County Administration building, they're not going to let me burn the right next to the building. So every year we have our landscape contractor go in and weed whack it and remove the previous year's vegetation, and that's simulating a burn. And so that's what they're doing here. Instead of having a burn, the past couple years at least, I don't know if you're going to introduce fire, been mowing it to replicate that burn. Because otherwise, if you don't have that burn or mowing, it'll go through that natural succession process. You'll get woody vegetation and it'll transform to shrub, to successional forest to forest. And that type of management is an important part of a prairie.
Really quick. To answer her question, what's in here?
Oh, yeah.
That's you.
So really quick. So I realized we kind of several paragraphs, and basically it's the process, year 1, year 2, year 3, that 3 years of maintenance. It explains it in paragraph form, what to expect those 3 years. In a nutshell, after you do a seeding of a prairie, the prairie plants will only get this big the first year. It's because they're perennial plants, they're putting roots down, okay? But you'll get weeds, and they're annuals. So you have to come in and mow several times above the prairie plants, but mow the tops off of all the annual plants so they don't go to seed, okay? So that's the sleep year. The creep year is year 2. And the plants may get this big, you may get a few flowering, but you still need to do possibly a mow in the first half of the growing season.
This is year 2, and we're going to be mowing it on Monday.
Yep.
So I don't have to send you an email.
And so, but now the perennial natives are this big, but now the roots are 5 feet deep, and then year 3 is sleep, creep, and then year 3 is leap, right? So year 3, the roots get established, the plants shoot up, and you generally don't have to mow at that point. And by the end of the 3rd growing season, into the beginning of the 4th, it's usually about ready to burn. And to go through the plants, you want me to go through some of the plants?
Some of the highlights.
Yeah. So, by the way, so you notice this looks different than that. That's because this is a little hill prairie, meaning that it's got gravel and sand. And so it supports different species than over there where you've got a little bit thicker, loamier soil. So you get low growing stuff on a dry prairie like this, and a little bit taller stuff on what's called a mesic or dry mesic prairie.
That's where I'm going to jump in and say that's why you need an ecologist to design your project, because you can't just go off the internet and pull off a native seed.
Yeah. So, I mean, so you got like so this is called side oats. It's a little, it's going to seed right now, and actually you can pull the seeds off and, spread them. This is Canada Gold, or not Canada Gold, Canada Wild Rye. It's kind of like a short-lived perennial that we put in our mixes. If Brad's picking purple prairie clover.
Nice.
There's pale purple coneflower. This is my favorite prairie plant. What else is right here? That's kind of the main ones that are right here. But
This is my favorite prairie plant.
there's also little blue stem in here as well. But the most of the yellow plants out there is yellow coneflower, mixed with monarda, which is the purple one. And then in some areas, so down there, so this is pale purple coneflower. It blooms about 2 weeks before purple coneflower, which is the purple one you see out there. There is some question about whether purple coneflower is native to this area, by the way. It's kind of an unknown. I like to put it in my mixes because until somebody tells me it's not supposed to be here, I'm going to put it in because of the color it adds and the pollinator benefit. And the purple one over here, oh my gosh, vervain. Hoary vervain is the purplish one with the spikes coming up on it.
Do you have butterfly weed?
So it was in the seed mix. I don't see any here, but maybe there might be some out there. But yes, it was in the seed mix. So that can be a touchy
point. One monarch flying.
I saw him too, yeah. Butterfly milkweed can be kind of touchy. Yeah, it either does really well or not well at all. It's a kind of an interesting plant.
Well, shall we move to the next area? Here, because this little area that you see flowering kind of right here is the stormwater detention basin for this park. And when the park was put in, this is turf grass. So again, in our plans, we identify areas where we can make green infrastructure pieces happen to make the green corridor. Way out there where it's all green, that's the Spella wetland. It's about 80 acres. That was donated to the village by the developer. And then the village did a project where we took out, busted up all the drain tile, let the land kind of come back, let the hydrology come back and the soils come back. And then we did do a restoration project there. Interestingly about that, even though it was farmed and we took out the drain tile, about 20% of the site came back naturally without us seeding or doing anything to it, which was really kind of interesting and cool. But that's the Spella wetland. That's a wetland. And these are the upland areas again. This used to be turf grass. We used to mow it as part of the park, and you can see what it is now with its flowering and water quality benefits. This project right here, when developers come in, for instance, Walmart, okay, if they don't have wetlands or features on their site that are jurisdictional by the Army Corps of Engineers or the EPA, or any of the other regulating agencies. The Village of Algonquin, we follow the Kane County Stormwater Ordinance. And that ordinance allows local municipalities to have jurisdiction over isolated wetlands. So small, isolated, farmed wetlands and all that, in the middle of where Walmart wants to build, aren't really going to do anything for the green infrastructure network. Smaller, trying to save those pieces and work around them really isn't beneficial. So we require the developers to pay a fee in lieu if they are going to fill an isolated wetland. It's about $69,000 an acre that we require them to pay. It goes in a restricted fund, and then we use that to do these kind of projects in an area that's a green infrastructure corridor that makes sense, that ties everything in.
Is that fee in addition to what the Army Corps is going to charge for the replacement?
So the Army Corps, I think, only takes jurisdiction over wetlands 20 acres or larger, I think.
What's the question about?
No, it's based on.
It changes like every couple of years. So I apologize. So there's a certain criteria that the Corps is responsible or takes jurisdiction over the wetlands. If they do not, so every developer has to come in and they have to do a jurisdictional determination on their development site. And the Army Corps comes out and they say, nope, we don't have any jurisdiction over anything here. There's 5 isolated wetlands. They don't connect to a stream corridor. There's no streams. your JD, the Corps is signing off on, we don't have any issues. However, through the stormwater ordinance and the wetland delineation that the developer has to do, they may have identified 1, 2, 3 isolated wetlands, and the village has the authority then to charge for filling those isolated wetlands. So it is not, it can be in addition to what their Corps requires or not, based on the site and the jurisdictional determination.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to add anything to that.
I'll chime in really quick because I've heard a couple questions. So yes, that's basically restored wetland. So this is interesting. So I'm going to talk about the bad again because this is part of the maintenance you have to maintain. Just upstream there's a quarry. Guess what is throughout the whole quarry? Phragmites, right? And this is downwind. So we come in every year with a special, where's Brad? Where's Brad? Oh, Brad can explain, with special equipment that we have that basically wicks the top of them to keep them under control. A lot of that is cattail. So early on in my green years, my first 5 years, I was kind of a cattail Nazi. I learned very quickly that it's pointless to control cattail. So unless it's in a really formal setting and you want to control it, I've learned to just kind of let it do its thing, as long as it's kind of mixed with other stuff is not a terrible thing. This gets burned every 3 years, but within burns you do get resprouting willows and cottonwoods. And so what the fire doesn't kill, then I think Brad, as part of his contract, comes in the winter when the ground's frozen and everything's dormant, and we cut those down.
So yeah, I could talk a little bit more about that. So, what we have talking about the equipment that we use to take care of the Phragmites in here. It's called a Marshmaster. Think of an aluminum tank. It's pretty big, about 20 feet long, 10 feet tall, 8 feet wide, and we have what's called a wick bar, which is a 20-foot long PVC pipe that's on the front, and it's kind of like a forklift that can raise up and down, and there's 2 chambers in there, one with pressurized herbicide, and then there's a rope that's a wick rope, and then there's a low pressure side. And what you do is you raise it so that you hit your target species, in this case Phragmites, but you're not hitting anything below that, and you, by physical contact, apply the herbicide directly to the target species. And it's designed in such a way that it can move up and down, because there are some areas where the Phragmites is taller or shorter, and you need to be able to move that wick bar up and down to be able to hit it. With that piece of machinery, I can do in one day with one operator what it takes 20 to 30 crew doing by hand, without killing any of the native sedges or vegetation below that. So you'll see that that's actually on the list. We'll probably be out here in the next 2 weeks with that piece of equipment. I had it tested today. It's up and running, and we're going to be out starting on Monday getting that used in this area. As far as the brushing is concerned, that's something that Steve alluded to. We typically do that in the winter months. So we did run a fire through here. I think it was just this last year. This was burned, and the pockets of willows were too big. Basically, anything much bigger than your finger in diameter won't get killed by a fire. So we'll come in here with crews, and we will hand brush out the larger pockets of willow this winter.
When you say brush out, is that when you apply herbicide to the base?
Yeah, so we stump treat, so we will cut as close to the ground as we can get, and then apply directly to the cut stump herbicide. Usually, also with brushing, I always recommend having at least 1, if not 2 seasons of follow-up treatment to make sure to hit resprouting stumps. The herbicide, depending on how much snow is on the ground, depending on a lot of factors, usually 80 to 90% effective. So you really need to come back in the following spring or early summer, especially with willows, honeysuckle, buckthorn. Those are the 3 big ones that are often needing of resprout treatment. So definitely make sure you schedule that in as well.
And I'm just going to jump in here, which is what Brad is describing and stuff. Again, it is another reason to hire a contractor that is knowledgeable responsible and knows what they're doing. It's a reason why we write an RFP and we don't go out for a low bid, and we ask our board for all these reasons to please hire this company or whatever, because we really want the spaces to keep looking like this. So whether it's Res or some other great companies, NCAT, V3, some in the area, you just need people that know what they're doing and how to do that.
And it's protecting your investment.
It's really protecting your investment. And I told you the cost for protecting that investment in comparison to other maintenance costs. We wanted to bring you down here to show you now another piece of the green infrastructure. So this, again, it was done separately and differently than the detention basin, then the pollinator, then the woodland, then all that. This is the headwaters area of Woods Creek. This was done with a 319 grant, water quality grant from the EPA. So 60%, so the village did have like a 40% match to do this. This one is going on 6 years, I think, that we've done it. But this is a great example of this farm. And this is not a naturally occurring creek. So this is that area on your sheet where Steve was saying that it was wetland and prairie. This wetland was here historically, but this whole area was like marsh, wetland, prairie. When the farmer came out here, the IMPs in fact, they installed drain tile throughout all of this land in order to farm it. And obviously the drain tile has to drain somewhere, so they made this ditch all the way out to where the actual creek starts a little bit downstream. So we're obviously, because of drainage and development, is still bringing stormwater to this area and to this creek. It has to have somewhere to go. Sure, we could have came in and we could have put in a gigantic 36 or 48 inch diameter pipe and put all gray infrastructure and filled this all in and let's get the water. This does drain these homes. It drains a lot of the Randall Road corridor, comes down this way, drains into this creek. So it could have been all hard gray infrastructure. But we took the ditch, I always say, we took a ditch and we made it into a creek, into the riparian corridor. So again, this was the wall of green trees, invasive species, which were channelizing the creek, causing huge erosion problems. Another thing about, especially when you have invasive tree species along a creek that aren't supposed to be there, whether they're shrubs or bushes or big trees, they fall down, they fall into the creek. They cause blockage, they cause dams, they cause all kinds of erosion issues. And for the community, and especially for public works, that means localized flooding. When we restore everything back, I've been here 27 years, so back in the day, 25 years ago, if we would get a 2-inch rain event, it was a disaster. All hands, Tom works for the wastewater treatment plant, so it was people in waders, guys in waders. These streets and these subdivisions were flooding, land was flooding, houses were flooding. The water couldn't flow and didn't soak into the ground. So it was just rushing all over. Stuff was blocking the creek, creating these dams. Water can't get around it. It's going to the least point of resistance. When we do green infrastructure, we allow a huge portion, usually the first couple inches of rain, soak into the ground. That's not running off. And now we basically, because our green infrastructure is so extensive throughout the entire village, we don't have any flooding issues. Now, this does not include the Fox River. That's its own animal, and that's something different. But we don't have really, other than the storm grate getting blocked in front of somebody's house and water is sitting there, or backyard drainage issues. We do not have any flooding issues within the village anymore. The rain events Scott was talking about have changed significantly in the last 6 or 7 years. They are heavy, they are intense, and they are a lot of rain and just a normal day for us. We do not have any issues because the green infrastructure is literally taking care of that problem. So kind of just an example of taking something from the past, again, where we can't put it totally back to what it was or what was there, but we can adapt to that. And instead of, again, putting in gray infrastructure and just getting the water away, we can do a lot of benefits for that.
So who takes care of all those minerals?
The minnows? Nobody. Themselves. I don't know. Steve can tell you what fish are in here.
I actually went to school for fish and stream biology, but so I want to point, like, if you look downstream here, so before this was restored, if you can imagine, again, this was all incredibly flat. It was a wetland, and the farmer dug a ditch to try to get the water out to farmer. This was a straight arrow that basically had, if you imagine, the farmer has to dig out the soil, and what do? They put it on the side of the creek. It's called a spoil pile. There were 5-foot-high spoil piles of soil all the way down this thing. So the project involved, so there, you can't see it because there's vegetation in the water. And by the way, the vegetation in this portion of the stream, because it is so flat through here, because it used to be a wetland, that it's got a really mucky substrate, and so you just get emergent plants. When you go downstream, it's got more gradient, meaning it flows a little faster, and it looks more like a stream. But again, so taking a farm ditch and turning it into this. But the project involved shaving off all of those berms all the way down to that bridge, creating a floodplain shelf. So just outside the creek are these little flat shelves where all these emergent wetland plants are. So now, instead of the water just being, shot down a gun, a rifle, it's essentially, you've got some meanders in here, and the water can come up and spill into the floodplain a little bit, which slows the water down, filters it.
We put riffles.
Yep, and so there's a couple riffles in there. So when a stream is very low gradient, meaning it's very flat, you can't put many riffles in because then it just backs the waters up and creates ponds, basically. So you can only put a riffle in every several hundred yards, otherwise you just get ponding behind them. So yeah, this is kind of an example of a stream restoration, turning a farm ditch into kind of a nice corridor.
And most of our rivers were more wetland complexes. So the Des Plaines River is a major river. And it was really mainly a large wetland complex prior to development. When we pave over everything, we change the hydrology. So in natural hydrology, rains, water hits the ground, and the majority of that water infiltrates down into the ground and restores our lakes, rivers, or restores our aquifers. But it's also moving slowly and providing a base flow of cool, clean water to our lakes, rivers, streams, and wetlands. When we pave over it, water is no longer able to infiltrate down, so it hits the land surface and rushes off and goes into these low areas that were once, calm wetland areas, and turns it into a flood stage. So we completely altered our hydrology. The farm ditches were a further escalation of that disturbance. But what we're talking about is restoring a gradual bank instead of a deeply incised bank, and that allows for flood water to expand, and that reduces the amount of flooding downstream. So this is a major flood mitigation project in addition to all the other benefits that we're talking about. And we're actually pulling out enclosed pipe in a lot of areas. Crystal Creek is just downstream from Crystal Lake, is the latest example of that, where they got a 319 grant, and they're going to take out the sewer, the pipe that was enclosed, and restore the open ground and have a gradual bank. So what we're looking at here is just a tremendous flood mitigation project, water quality project, and beautiful landscaping project, and it's providing all these benefits that are providing cost savings to all the residents in the municipality. So just all these benefits from the single type of project.